Indiana. And it's 1966 403B. He's owned the car for a little over 15 years, and he owns 11 other Peugeots. He just retired after 31 and a half years with, you're going to have to say the name, a consulting company based in Princeton, New Jersey. Jim previously lived in northeastern Pennsylvania. This car was purchased from an ex-Peugeot dealer in Connecticut who sold the car to the original owner, but then purchased it from her estate years later. It was stored for quite a while, and then Dave, who was actually the dealer, refurbished it, listed it in Hemmings News, and Jim and his wife Pam drove up to see it and drove it home to Langhorne, Pennsylvania, which is where he previously lived. It's a beautiful car, Jim. Does anybody have any questions about driving a Peugeot?
No, but we're in northeastern Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I've got a 403 Cabriolet too, so those who remember. Yeah, Pam used to say that we were dropping our heads as children. That's why the Peugeot enthusiast.
You have to understand that Jim is quite a Peugeot guy, and he told me yesterday that for his retirement gift, the company gave him a trip to France to visit the Peugeot Museum. And I think that's a fitting retirement gift. Congratulations, Jim.
Thank you.
Here's Jim. Oh, there he is. I'd like to introduce you to Chem Water from Jackson Heights, New York. Again, nobody comes from around the corner. 1979 Visa. He's owned the cars for 3 years. He also owns a 2CV, a DS19, and an AMI 8 brake, which if you go onto the Carlisle website and search for that, you'll find him in the motocross a few years ago where it looked like he was going to roll it over on the roof. It was a great time. He's owned Citroën since 1986, and it's great to have one because it allows you to meet interesting and fun people. And I think that's why we're all here today. He bought the Visa in France to celebrate his 50th birthday. That's pretty great. It's a great car for road trips and gets 52 miles to the gallon. And for anyone who doesn't know, Kim is the co-conspirator in Drive She Said, or one of the co-conspirators in Drive She Said, who now sponsored the Citroën Rendezvous in New York, which is about a month ago. Does anybody have any questions for Kim?
Two. Air-cooled? Air-cooled. Excellent.
Yeah, I think y'all have to look at this dash on here. Is this all original stuff in here? What's this big gizmo on the left here?
It's everything. It's the wipers, the turn signal,
The horn, the turn signals,
the lights.
everything's in a Pepsi can size.
How fast will it go? We had it going faster than 90 miles an hour in France.
Wow. What the hell was that? Downhill was that?
With him being a 79, was it old enough that you didn't have any problems getting it into the U.S.? Great. Congratulations on the car.
I've never taken it.
Brian here. Brian, come on up.
Okay.
This is Brian Peters. He's from Washington, D.C., and this is his 81 CX Plus. He's only owned it for a year. I learned something new about Brian myself today. Brian was born in France. His parents drove a rented 2CV while his mother was pregnant with him back in Paris. So that's a pretty great 1965. So that's pretty cool. That's neat. This car is really unusual and one of a kind. was owned by Prince Rainier of Monaco and Grace Kelly, and he bought it not long ago. I think he told me from an auction, and Les Woods got it into driving condition. It's a very, very rare and got a lot of provenance. You're going to be very proud of it. Brian's also owned a lot of other very exotic and unique cars over the years, including a very nice SM and a very nice GS and a Renault 5 Turbo and all kinds of neat cars. So this is a really nice one to add to your collection.
Thanks, Brad.
Anybody have a question? I do. How in the world do you find a car that was owned by Grace Kelly?
Well, the auction actually was advertised in magazines. So it was kind of fun because I was bidding on the telephone and watching my bid on my computer in Monte Carlo.
Wow. Was it very expensive?
That's foul.
It depends. It's all relative.
That's a foul.
I imagine it could have gone through the roof.
Yeah. Well,
That's not good.
is my future wife going to be watching?
So I'm assuming that you've got all the provenance, the proof that it was owned by them
Yeah, I
and
have all
everything.
the paperwork.
Great.
Wow.
Very nice car.
What happened to the other windshield wiper?
I ripped it off.
Hey, you know, this is a, if you look at this car closely, what's really interesting about this car is this is a Series 1 car, and it sort of reflects a lot. There weren't a whole lot of changes from the time they went from the DS. This was the first model that replaced the DS. So if you look at this car, although there were a few changes made from the mid-70s until 81, this is pretty much the car that replaced the DS. And that we were promised that we'd have eventually in the United States, and it never happened. So, are there any other questions? Not? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Actually, he was filling one out. I don't know if he was filling it out back there.
Mine gets away with a little bit.
Is Ron here?
Donna. It's Donna's
Come on
car.
out, Donna.
It's Donna's.
This car is owned by Donna Hayes,
And my husband Ron.
and I don't know where he's at.
I don't know where he's
I think he's hiding too.
We bought it in 2007 from Eric Hewitt. And, well, it's actually I'm the one that drives it.
And you live in Conowingo, Maryland, right? So, what year is it? It's a 1976?
No, this is actually about an 80.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Does anybody have any questions for Donna?
I don't think I have one for the Diane.
Okay. All right, I'd like to introduce you to Martin Gamboni. He's from Basking Ridge, New Jersey, and his 1969 Diane. He's owned the car since 2002. He also has 3 DS21s and an 83 Diane. He's a dental radiology specialist, and his job involves a lot of travel. He got into Citroëns because his dad first purchased a D model when he was 4 years old. So blame it on Dad. About the car, he says it's a mystery car. He was told that he's only the second owner, and the title says it's a 1969, but the body's a 1976. So that's the mystery, is how it got that way. Martin, does anybody have any questions for Martin? I know you come here very often. What's the longest trip you've ever made?
In this country?
Has the car been to Europe also?
Well, I have the 83 I have in Sweden. I went down to Czech Republic.
How many miles approximately?
I'd say probably about 1,500 miles.
Wow. Great. Does anybody else have any questions for Mark? Very nice car, very pretty car.
Thank you, Brad.
Congratulations. Jim Haney, I'd like to introduce you to Jim. Good to see you, Jim. Again, nobody comes from right around the corner. Jim's from Indianapolis, Indiana. He could be out there watching the practice for the race, right?
Listen to it, listen to the playoffs on the radio, too. So.
1970 DS21. And he's owned this car, is that right?
30 years. Yeah.
30 years.
I'm 10 years old when I got it.
He also owns a Omni 6 wagon and a CX GTI Turbo. His first Citroën was a 77 Omni, and he traded that.
I had a Chevy van that I had to put a new motor in. So I went on the Trader, the paper that had all the vehicles in it from numbers of years ago in the 70s. And I found a Me for $100, and I bought it so I could drive it around. I put the motor into the van, and I've been hooked ever since.
And what he mentions about the car, and I find it hard to believe, is that the paint job was done by Maytag.
Yeah,
Looks like they did a very good job.
With the matching Citroën color with the little bling added to it with metal flake on it. This was probably the Presidente paint job.
Now, I know, Jim, you've been into Carlisle many times, into the Rendezvous.
Yeah.
How many miles have you put on this thing in the last 30 years, do you think?
I just looked at my trip from Indianapolis to here is 500 miles. Okay, so that's 1,000 miles each year, and then going to New York is probably another 700 miles, so 1,400 miles. If I go to both of those, I'm at 3,000 miles a year.
Just going to 2 meets.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Does anybody have any questions for Jim?
I asked for green tint on the windows. They put the tint on, it matches the car perfectly. I'm real happy with it. It still didn't take care of the heat ingress into the engine compartment. I just got a new air conditioner and had it running. This is as a test trip. Yeah, I need to seal up things to keep the heat out. So
The car looks good.
I like it.
You're having a lot of fun, right?
Oh yeah,
30
too much
years.
fun.
Good for you.
I should be arrested for having so much fun.
Okay, this car is Bob Robinson's from Gaithersburg, Maryland. That's straight down 15 from Gettysburg. It's a 72 SM. He also owns a 67 DS21 Plus and a 74 DS23 Plus. Neither of which run. Oh, but this one does. He's owned 6 Citroëns in the past 38 years, and his interest in Citroëns flows from when his father bought a 1969 ID19 Grand Roof. And this is the car that once belonged to Tommy Chong from Cheech and Chong. I think that's pretty cool. So, does that have any dope in it?
No, but I bought this car from an old guy in Western Maryland who's losing his faculties for $500.
I hope he's not around.
He isn't losing his faculties, I won't remember.
He's up there enjoying life. So your family's owned this car for a while then?
Yeah, about 7 years, I think, isn't it? 7 or 8 years. This one.
No, try 10 or 11.
Great.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. Yeah, it is. It has been at least 11.
It was bought off of eBay.
Yeah.
The early days of eBay. Bought it off of eBay. At buy it now price. It was paid. It was bought after a call to Jerry Hathaway because we wanted to verify its condition.
So he knew the car?
He knew the car. It has a sunroof. It's one of the few SMs with a sunroof that was added in Belgium.
And we actually have a registration form with Tommy Chung's name on it.
Cool.
Yeah.
We're the third owners. Tommy sold it to his assistant, who sold it to us.
Great.
One of my favorite Citroën stories is from when I was stationed over in England in the early 80s. I bought a DS23 that I found through a dealer I did business with that my brother Paul bought originally and then sold back to me about a year later. And while I was stationed there, I was worked in calibration in the Air Force, and we would occasionally there would be two-man teams sent out to a base out, somewhere out in England to do on-site calibrations, and we would be gone for 90 days to 2 or 3 different bases. And the guy that I was on this TDY with, as we got to our last location, he decided he wanted to go back the first weekend we were there and spend a weekend with his wife and daughter. And so we took the train back and then drove my DS23 back to the base, and we'd go back and forth on the weekends. Well, the first weekend we're on our way back, and we're on one of the motorways there in England, and I wanted to drive, and I put my foot down and just let the car go, and we were going over 115 miles an hour. And I looked over, and he was a little bit nervous because it's a left-hand drive car in a right-hand drive country for one thing. And I said, what was the name? I said, you look a little nervous. He said, well, we're going a little bit fast. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, how about if I just back off the throttle and push it down until just before the second barrel's going to open, and we'll just drive at that speed. He says, well, that sounds fair. So I backed off and just gently pushed down until I just felt that stop. This car was going 105 miles an hour. And he was still nervous, of course. But he didn't think the car would go anywhere over about 70 miles an hour at that. Didn't realize how streamlined the cars actually are.
Great. Congratulations on the car. It's very nice.
I'm just the caretaker.
You want to tell you that. Hey, this is Bruce Logan. He's from Arlington, Virginia, and his 1973 DS20. He's owned it for 4 years, and his parents owned a 1964 DS19 Citroën, which at the age of 14, he pushed them into buying. It was sold before he got his driver's license, but finally, 42 odd years later, he gave in to temptation and got one of his own. Good job.
Yeah, I have to actually give thanks if the Lees are still here, because I used to have what I used to call my Citroën dream. Here, I had this repeating dream that my parents still had the Citroën, and they gave it to me. It was a light blue Aero Super, and then I wake up and like, oh, it's not real. But about 5 years ago, I was driving up into Pennsylvania, and I stopped at a road stop right on the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. And I hadn't seen a Citroën in years, and there was this Citroën station wagon that belonged to the Lees, and I waited till they came out, and I went really crazy. And I thought that was a message for me, that I needed to go back and fulfill my dreams. And thanks to them, and thanks to support of one club member, Mark Dettori, who's not here today, Mark found the car for me in France and brought it over, and the rest is history, I guess.
Great. Bruce says he's the third owner of this, and it is a French spec car, and he got it through Mark Dettori. And the two previous owners lived near Disney World, France, which